Here's my opening slide of the presentation. This is called Integrating Cultural Humility into English Teaching. And we're going to talk about a lot of different things today, but these 8 in particular. Let me get to the next slide here. So I'll make a little introductions and give you some context. We're going to talk about what it means to create a brave space. We're going to connect with one another, what brings you here. We'll talk about some challenges around this topic, and then we'll differentiate between what is cultural competence versus cultural humility. And then I'm going to show you how to practice and model cultural humility with the people that you're working with, whether you're a one-on-one tutor or a teacher of group classes. You'll be able to kind of apply all of this to any of those settings. And then we'll talk about noticing and when we're judging and when we're exhibiting bias, and then we'll talk about how we can build belonging in the classroom. And then hopefully we'll have a little time for Q&A. We'll see. I've got a lot of information, so hopefully we can get through all of it. So just a little more. You heard the background there. I just wanted to share some photos of me, mostly from the Immigrant and Refugee Center that was mentioned earlier. These are some students that I had worked with at that time. I have loved being at Intercambio, but my work at Intercambio is definitely informed by working most recently with the populations that I did in northeastern Colorado for 5 years. And I've worked with everyone from kindergartners up to people in their 80s, but mostly with adults. Adult learning is really where I've spent most of my time. Um, and yeah, I think the only thing there at the bottom is that I've received multiple trainings in things like cultural sensitivity over the past 5 to 6 years, and so I'm bringing that informed perspective when I'm going to talk about what cultural humility is. So I just want to give a little background about Intercambio. How many of you are familiar with Intercambio? You're using the Intercambio materials, Confidence and Connections, or maybe you've even been to a workshop with me. I do see some familiar names. And so, yes, I think that some of you I have seen at the Intercambio workshops that we give, because as Wisconsin literacy members, those workshops are open to you. So you can ask your program administrator that gets the emails, or Wisconsin, the folks at Wisconsin Literacy get our emails as well that open up those trainings for you. And so as members of our organization. So we bring English learners and community volunteers together in language classes and gatherings to build skills, confidence, and life-changing connections. And we mean that in a two-way sense, that what we believe is that if we engage community volunteers with the English language learning adult populations in our communities, they build bridges and bonds together, and that we can see better communities and better community cohesion upon bringing those groups together, and they learn from one another. It's not a top-down model where the teacher is giving everything to the learner. It's kind of a side-by-side model where there's this mutual exchange. So that's kind of our philosophy, our mission, what it's born on. We've been around. This is going to actually be our 25th anniversary this year, because we technically started in late 2000, early 2001. So we are already starting to celebrate our 25 years of doing this work. And we've got some samples of the curriculum that we have developed here. Some of you maybe have worked with this one down here, the Immigrant Guide. Pronunciation Fun with Pictures is another book that we have. And then we have a full-blown curriculum called Confidence and Connections. And then here, the 2020 to 2025, in the last 5 years, we've grown to more than 120 members, of which Wisconsin Literacy is a part of that family membership network. So again, you all are welcome to participate in the offerings that we have as well. So we have group and one-on-one classes physically, in Boulder County, Colorado. We have a program called Intercambio Online, where we match a volunteer from anywhere in the country with a learner anywhere in the country, and we have an online platform where they can use the curriculum to have gains in English. The students will gain in English. And then, of course, we have our Product Sales and National Network, and the National Network is a part of why I'm here today, because we do have this partnership with Wisconsin Literacy. And down at the bottom, I love putting, because this to me is the trunk of the tree with all these branches growing out, that relationship-based English to speakers of other languages centered on mutual learning, that two-way learning is what we are all about. So that's it. I guess, we have curriculum, we have support, we have opportunities for collaboration through the workshops and meetups that we have online for anyone that is a member. And it does say we have 32 Wisconsin members in our network, and 2/3 are renewed for the year already. So again, you are a part of Intercombio, whether you realized it or not. So here's what we're going to learn. I would like for you today to reflect on your cultural lens. And what that means is to explore, what are my biases that I have and how do I identify them? We'll work with some tools for doing that. We'll gain some tools and practice in shifting bias. How can I view others with a fresh lens? Better engage with people who are different in any situation. So how can I learn to observe others without judging? And again, this can be anybody, not just necessarily in the English language learning classroom or the adult basic education classroom, but anywhere in life. I want to increase your confidence and courage to continue these important conversations. We'll talk a little bit about overcoming fears or barriers to continue doing this, and help create a classroom that nurtures belonging to overcome cultural gaps. So how can I create a classroom that connects more people more effectively? So this is what I hope. Okay, here's a little quotation here. It says, in order to practice true cultural humility, a person must also be aware of and sensitive to historic realities like legacies of violence and oppression against certain groups of people. And this comes from a University of Texas site called the Hog Blog, and I've linked it down below. You can receive a copy of these slides when I get done. There will be a QR code for you to scan to be able to receive a PDF of this presentation. So you'll have access to all those links and so on. But I really hope that during this presentation that you will build capacity to accelerate your own ongoing cultural learning, because we all need to do our ongoing work. I've been doing this for nearly 35 years, and I'm still absolutely growing in my cultural knowledge, in my cross-cultural competence, and my cultural humility when I work with people from different backgrounds. So here's where I would like to talk about, what does it mean to create a brave space? We sometimes talk about safe spaces. This is not exactly that. It can incorporate pieces of that, but it's more the idea that a space is safe enough to where people feel brave to speak up. So it says there, safe to be brave enough to speak out. And when we talk about race or culture, it's really important to create that environment of openness and courage. And so what I like to do is open with a particular poem whenever I'm meeting with people, especially meeting with teachers who are doing this work, this cross-cultural work. Okay, so here it is. There is no such thing as a safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars and have caused wounds. This space seeks to turn down the volume of the world outside and amplify voices that have to fight to be heard elsewhere. This space will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our space together, and we'll work on it side by side. So this is a little bit of an invocation to have you join me in this space now to work on this kind of thing side by side. So I'm asking you to join me in being courageous to talk about the things we're going to talk about today, and to speak out and share your perspectives. Hopefully we'll have a little bit of time to do that in the session. But I want this to be our space together and work on this together today. Okay, there is a QR code. I am actually going to see if I can copy this link. I may have to, hang on a second here. Let's see if I can do it from this place. Oh, No, but you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to just go to another screen that you should be able to see. Oh, I've lost my green highlight though. Do you see a bulletin board that's from Padlet on the screen right now?
Yes, we do.
Okay, good. So I am going to see if I can share this. No, hold on a second. I'm going to pop out of this so I can grab the link more easily this way here, and then I'll put the link in the chat. But you should be able to, if you have a phone handy with you also, I would like you to scan that QR code, but it will also be easy if I just plunk this in the chat. So, okay, there we go. You should have that in the chat. I'll go back into presentation mode here, but we will skip over to look at that bulletin board Padlet in just a moment. So if you've got your phone, go ahead and grab it and scan this code. And you'll see at the top of the page that there are 3 questions. Why did you join this session? Where are you in your journey of understanding cultural humility? And what do you hope to learn? And you'll see there are actually some other responses from when I gave this presentation a few months ago for another conference or organization, but I'd like you to do that. So does everyone have the link? Okay, so let me escape out of this for just a second and I will bring up this here. Okay, so here we've got the responses. So tell us all why you're here. Have you heard of cultural humility before? How would you define it? I guess this is this question here. Where are you in your journey of understanding cultural humility? Why did you join this session? What do you hope to learn? And this over here, you'll have this link when you get the presentation. And so I've also got resources that are kind of on this last column. But I like this. Currently learning to teach ESL and want to grow in my abilities. Interested, love the work I've done so far. Let me scroll down a little further here. I'm interested in this topic and improving outreach. There's always room for improvement to understand how to be culturally aware, enhance understanding. Yeah, this is great. Oh, I love this. If you're missing anything in my health equity work, cultural humility actually came out of the healthcare industry. Um, and or the healthcare, I hate to call it an industry. Let's call it the healthcare space. Okay, and it was in response to how there are differences between cultures and how we view health and healthcare. And so most of the work in this area of cultural humility has come out of that space. Oh, I like that. I'll be teaching a college level education diversity class this summer. Yes, this material will be very helpful. How to be respectful of other cultures. I like this so much. Okay, have you heard of cultural humility before? Yes, but I can always use more ideas. It's a journey. I've attended several DEI and cultural competencies, but always looking to learn more. Good. I think I know about it, but I don't intentionally practice it. New to this topic. Okay, so we have a whole spectrum then of folks and familiarity. And then it looks like people want to just learn more and improve teaching abilities, create this brave space in the classroom, reflect on practice, and impact. Oh, that was sorry, that was from the 10-month ago. Maybe someone else has that too. So excellent. These are all wonderful responses. And again, this is a Padlet, so you can go back and kind of reflect on what others have had to say. But this is wonderful. I love that you all have new ideas that you are hoping to learn. So let's bring this presentation back. And first off, I want to go ahead and talk about some of the challenges when working in this area. And probably the biggest challenge is that when we have programming for, especially for English language learners coming from multiple places, but this applies for adult basic education as well, and the learners that come in. And a lot of times, the people coming into the adult basic education space are also from these same diverse backgrounds. So it's not just the English language learning community that has, represents a lot of diversity, but we've got people that are all different nationalities, some nationalities that are in conflict with each other, in fact, right? In the same classroom. All different ages. With our adult programs, they do, typically we have 18 and up. But there's all different generations that are represented. Socioeconomic statuses. With our students that we have at Intercambio in our programming, it's there's a whole span of socioeconomic backgrounds as well as academic backgrounds. Some of you may have students with limited or interrupted formal education who maybe cannot read in their home language versus maybe even in the same classroom, if you're in a group class situation, someone who's got a PhD or is a physician or a dentist in their home country where they came from. All different religions, genders, etc. So what's beautiful about this is we have this opportunity to have a cross-cultural exchange. Where else can you find so many diverse groups of people in one space, except for maybe the United Nations, but in a classroom where people are learning English? It's really quite amazing how this can bring people together, and we can really capitalize on that to learn from one another. But this is true of our participants. They're very diverse. Also, a lot of our learners, adult learners in particular, struggle with having low confidence, low self-esteem about learning English, maybe about other areas in their lives as well. But there's a lot of, belief of like, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I have what it takes to learn English, and it's a long road and it feels frustrating. There's a fear of failure. There are cultural differences and divides that happen not only, between maybe teacher and student, but perceptions of classrooms and what that means from student to student. Okay. Also feeling judged or feeling stupid. That people come in, they just come in with a lot of a lot that they're carrying. They don't feel belonging. Okay. So let's think for a moment. And actually, any questions about this so far? Is this true of students that you see that you are working with? Have you noticed this? You can just give me thumbs up or like, no, they're all great. They're all super confident. They can do anything. That's true. We always do have those. There are super confident students. It's not to say that every student is like this, but as a whole, I have found that there's at least one of these characteristics, I think, with most adult learners, even in the volunteer teachers that I teach, that I train to work in our program. Okay, so let's shift a little bit now and talk about why do we avoid conversations about culture? So any ideas, if you want to put something in the chat about why you think, why do people avoid having conversations about culture? And this can even be conversations about culture between people who were born and raised in the United States. We have a lot of people coming from different cultures. Okay, good. We don't want to offend. We're scared of saying the wrong thing. We don't understand what's going on. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the number one thing that I put here is that people are afraid to say the wrong thing. We don't want to put our foot in our mouth, and it feels kind of scary to talk about this. And then, yeah, Kathleen said we don't know enough about their country or state to speak knowingly. Or, yeah, Lisa, that's a good point. Sometimes these conversations can be very triggering to people and bring up bad memories, bad trauma that they've experienced. But then also, I think there's a sense of shame that we're ashamed about how much we don't know. And that can come up when we're trying to have these conversations. Okay, and then you've given me other reasons. Oh, we need brave containers, right? If we can't trust one another, it's very difficult to have these types of conversations with one another. Okay, and you've given me some great other reasons. So let's talk now about what does it take to create an environment for courageous conversations, especially if we're working in, well, if you're in a group, this is representing a group class here, but even if you're in a one-on-one tutoring situation, how do you help the learner that you're working with to feel comfortable enough to trust you? So the first thing we do want to do is create that brave space. And the ways that we can do that are to set some ground rules. These can be things like class agreements. Um, I taught a course for Intercambio last term that we had that finished in December. And the name of the class is called Conversations on Race and Equity Core. And it examines and looks at history in the United States from looking at African American history. And it brings up a lot of historical things that are very difficult to talk about. But before we started each class, we started with here are the class rules. One of which is I'm going to speak from my perspective and use statements that begin with I. I feel, I know, I think, and not, in my culture, because that's putting yourself as a representative for a whole culture is actually kind of not true, right? It's culture's not just one thing. So we taught, please speak from your individual perspective. These were advanced learners, so they weren't beginners. So that was helpful in setting ground rules. Um, we want to stay engaged and be focused and paying attention. I think all good teachers develop that kind of, I call it spidey senses, right? About just monitoring and looking and observing people's expressions. How's the vibe, right? In the classroom. So if we stay engaged, we can perceive this. Here's the I statements right here. Speak your truth, but use it in the form of presenting with I. And also expect to experience some discomfort. It's uncomfortable when we don't know what we don't know, and we put something out there and realize that maybe we've expressed something in a way that might cause feelings to be hurt or people to be uncomfortable, but we have to accept that and just try to feel safe enough and trusting enough that we can work with that. We also have to be able to accept non-closure. We're not going to solve all of the cross-cultural differences of millennia, in one classroom. But we can listen, reflect, and have time to share with one another. Another helpful thing is just to use what I call inclusive language. So this would be things like one that I've tended to shift towards, and this kind of came from the former executive director and co-founder of Intercambio, Lee Shanis. Some of you maybe have heard him speak in other contexts in the past, but he spoke about shifting instead of using the word American for people of the United States, talk about the United States. In the United States, this sometimes can happen because there are many countries in the Americas, right? We have North America. So a person from Canada and a person from Mexico is just as North American as people from the United States. So technically speaking, they are Americans also. And then we have South America, made up of dozens of countries, and they are also Americans by virtue of being in South America. So it just gets kind of confusing. And I think I've shifted my own language towards using the United States to talk about when I'm talking about people that live in the United States. So that's just a little example of what inclusive language might mean. Okay, so what I'd like to do next is have you kind of respond to some statements. And I just want you to give me a thumbs up if you agree, a thumbs down if you disagree. And if you're kind of like in the middle or it depends, you can do the sideways thumb. All right. And I will try to see, I can't see all of you. There's quite a few people in the Zoom room, but I can see a few of you on the screen. So I'm just going to trust that you're giving me the thumbs up, the thumbs down, and maybe in between. Okay. It's okay to ask people you meet, what do you do for work? What's your gut feeling? Is it okay? Is it or is it not okay? Okay, I see some sideways thumbs. All meetings should start and end on time. What's your gut feeling? Okay, a lot of thumbs up, I see. I'm okay with silence during a conversation. Okay. It's rude to interrupt someone while they're talking. One invitation is a real invitation. Meaning if I ask you to do something one time, I'm sincerely asking you to go do the thing. Okay. It's polite to say thank you if someone opens a door for me. Saying hi to strangers is important for the community. Okay. Making direct eye contact shows that you're paying attention. Okay. If I'm late for a class, I will enter the class quietly. Okay, let's look at this next screen here. So and go ahead if you would like to unmute during this part, that would be fine. I would like you to just kind of reflect with me in doing this. How did it feel to quickly answer these? Just put your gut reaction. Yes, no, yes, no. What do you think? Go ahead and unmute if you would like to talk about how it felt to answer these quickly.
I think I was aware that definitely answering from my own perspective while knowing that in other cultures and other backgrounds, the answer would be completely different.
Yeah, I love that, Ashley. Thank you for pointing that out, that we have like our perception of how we grew up and whether or not this is something that is like this is good, this is not good. But some of us already have an awareness that maybe to someone else this is not true, right? Yeah, and I like Rick said in the chat, not all cultures accept direct eye contact. Exactly. It can be very disrespectful to give direct eye contact. And yet, you know, I've seen teachers, not so much in the adult sphere, but I was thinking more of like elementary, primary, secondary, where it's like, look at me in the eye, or even telling our kids. I think I've done that with my kids before. Look me in the eye, or at least I received that when I was a child, but sometimes direct eye contact is not something that is true in every culture. Yeah. Jamie says, I had a sense that some of them were deeper ingrained in me than others. Yeah, yeah, there's like this kind of gut response of like, oh yeah, that's definitely something I think is true. Like the one that gets me is it's rude to interrupt someone while they are talking. I run into that a lot with people in the United States. I tend to have a little bit of ADHD, and my conversation is bouncing all over the place. And I have found that when I'm speaking to other people who have the same tendencies, we regularly talk over one another, and it's very comfortable. However, I have been in situations with people who have grown up through, through their with themselves, believing that interrupting is extremely rude and they get extremely upset. And I've had people get very angry with me when I have, in their mind, talked over them or interrupted them. So this can happen, I think even not just in cross-cultural settings in terms of people who are born in the same country, but it can happen with anybody, I think. Good. And do you have any thoughts on any of these? Some of them, okay, in the chat it says I could easily recognize what are social expectations of many people living in the United States, but these are certainly different in other cultures. Yeah, yeah, good. How many of you with that last one get upset? Well, you don't have to say, you don't have to admit it if you do. But how many of you have strong feelings about students coming in late for class? Okay, yeah. Thank you for Kathleen for being brave and raising your hand on that one. Yeah. It's a tough one, isn't it? Coming in late for class. And we've all had those students. I used to regularly have students who would come in late for multiple reasons that were completely legitimate for adults living adult lives. But the thing is they would have to go around and like say hi to all the people that they knew in the classroom. And it's interesting because I know that what they are doing is putting the relationship first, the relationships with other students. And I know that when I have classes like that, um, that people from other cultures sometimes prioritize relationships more than people from the United States. Sometimes we prioritize our own, if we're a teacher, it's our schedule and our teaching and our lesson plan that's taking the priority. versus um, encouraging those relationships, right? Yeah. Rick says in the chat, it's their time, so just go with it. However, some cultures don't have this trait about being on time. Yeah, it's kind of it is a difficult thing. And maybe I found the best thing to do is to come up with a class agreement and, and talk a little bit about this is where it's important to have the conversation. What is it going to be like for many people in the United States who might be sensitive about people coming in late and how they behave when they do, and coming to some agreements in class. That's what it's about, is just talking about it and coming to agreements with one another and understanding one another. Okay, so probably a lot of you have seen this diagram before, but I think it's helpful, especially when we're talking about what is cultural humility. You've got to know what culture is. So it encompasses lots of things: our religion, our food, what we wear, how we wear it, our language, marriage, music, what we believe is right and wrong, how we sit at the table, how we greet visitors, how we behave with loved ones, and a million other things. So we've got this cultural iceberg that's often a model for what is culture, with the things that are visible up at the top, things like food or language or clothing. But then we've got all of this stuff that's down underneath, that's operating sometimes on a very subconscious, intuitive, implicit level. Things about, core values and our worth ethic, our self-concept, our body language, gestures, thought patterns, that those things are all different for every person, right? Um, so just kind of bear in mind that we do have these things that are easy to see, and that's usually where we're focused, right? When we talk about, when there's like, let's study Japanese culture in third grade or something. It's a lot of times it is about the food and the folklore and the holidays. It's harder to get to those deeper things without getting to know each other a lot better and to communicate with one another. But cultural differences should not separate us from each other. Cultural diversity brings a collective strength. So I thought of this as being like a bouquet, right? All of the flowers are different, but when we put them all together in this beautiful bouquet, we see their individuality, but as a whole, it makes a beautiful, gift that you can give to someone, right? So this collective strength does benefit us all if we can engage with it. Okay, so that's all about kind of culture, where we're coming from, statements that get at what our culture is feeling like. But I want to talk now about reflecting on our cultural lens. What does that mean? So we have these dimensions of culture, right? Um, the individual dimensions of culture can start in the center with our personality, and it's made up of all of these different things, right? So who you are and these dimensions of diversity, influence things like our experiences, our beliefs and our values, our attitudes and behaviors. Some of us identify more with some of these than others. They might be quite important to us. For example, for me, I identify quite a lot with my gender, having grown up, with uh, being assigned a female when I was born and continuing to identify as a female, and everything that has meant for me growing up in the United States, and the advantages and disadvantages of that. And it has definitely shaped and impacted who I am. So that aspect, I identify with quite a lot. Some of you may have been born or raised in an ethnicity or a race that has impacted who you are and what your personality is, right? So that's what we mean when we're talking about the dimensions of individual culture. When I give this as a longer workshop, we have a lot of time to like explore this and talk it through with one another. But in a webinar where we've got, oh gosh, about 20 minutes left, we're going to have to race through. But I would like you, when you receive a copy of these slides, is to sort of think it through. Who am I? What aspects of this um, of individual culture are important to me? Because knowing yourself well helps you then when you go to get to know other people. Okay, and so some of these questions would be things that you could sit down and reflect on. When did I start to notice the different groups that I belong to? What kinds of experiences did I have growing up with people who were different from me? How do my personal and social identities influence my thoughts, beliefs, and my worldview? And how are my identities different from those of my students and colleagues? And how do these differences affect our interactions? There's a really wonderful guide that was published by newamerica.org. I've linked it down here. So when you receive this presentation, I encourage you to go through it and think through the answers to these questions for yourself. Okay, here's a little statement. What's that like in your culture? And I'm sorry, I don't know why there's a zigzag line. Sometimes on these PowerPoints, it puts weird things in and I try to take them out and they stick there. But just a little statement about this. What's that like in your culture? Have you ever said that to a student or group of students? What's that like in your culture? Well, the thing is that people are individuals, not the sole representatives of a culture. So to say, what's that like in your culture is putting that person on the spot to be a voice for something maybe they don't identify with. And so remember that cultures are not monoliths, they're not linear, they are in fact multifaceted, which is why I kind of have this multifaceted background on here. We want to remember that that culture can encompass all of those different variety of things that we talked about, and they will still differ from person to person. Just a quick example of this, I have met students that are from Turkey, but they are in fact not Turkish, they're Kurdish. And even though I might see that, oh, okay, their passport or the country that they're from will say Turkey on it, I cannot automatically assume that they are a person who identifies with Turkish culture or and what is that, right? Um, and so when we put people on the spot, it can also highlight things that have been painful for them because they grew up in a place, but that place didn't necessarily accept them either. It's happened to me too with students, let's say from Guatemala, where I always kind of assumed for the longest time that people from Guatemala spoke Spanish, which it is the national language. But I think there are hundreds of languages in tiny little Guatemala because of the differences where people grew up and having separate languages. So just keep that in mind. Culture is not a monolith. Okay, so instead of saying, what's that like in your culture? You can ask this, what's your experience with this cultural difference, right? How is this where you grew up? How is this similar or different from your home where you were growing up or in your family? And do you have any other ideas of things that you could say instead of what's that like in your culture? Okay, I did my teacher wait time. I counted to 10. So maybe think on this though. What are some other ways that you could ask this? I like, oh, from your experience, how does that make you feel? Yeah. What is this like in your experience? And you can name the cultural difference. Maybe we talked about earlier about opening doors and saying thank you. That can be common in many communities in the United States. But what about where you come from? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about cultural competence. Sorry, I'll back up here. Cultural competence versus cultural humility. So cultural competence is this kind of toolkit of the ability to understand, appreciate, and interact with people from cultures or belief systems different from your own. And so this would be like speaking words of another language, reading travel books to understand the do's and don'ts, knowing what actions in a particular culture are rude or polite, and focusing on social norms and lifestyles. And it is a lot like having a toolkit that you walk around with. And the goal of competency sounds really, really good, but it also can lead to generalization rather than recognizing the uniqueness of everyone. So what we want to do is model cultural humility instead. So we'll talk a little bit about what it is. We'll look at how we reflect and explore power dynamics, biases, and judgment. We'll prepare and open doors for honest dialogues and then model or show what it is. So students, they don't need to know what the term cultural humility is. They just need to see it so you can show it and model it for them. So first of all, cultural competency is a goal and cultural humility is a mindset. It's a continuous reflection on your biases that you have and how you treat and understand others. So that exercise where we talked about the agree and disagree, that's actually a reflection on our biases. What bias do we have about interrupting people or about coming to class late and understanding what that is for us? We have to be really aware of power imbalances. Automatically, there's a power imbalance with teacher and student, right? And in many cultures, it's an extreme power imbalance. Um, Whereas I think generally speaking in the United States, we try to even out those power imbalances in adult education. Not always. It kind of depends on the person and how much they might be on their own power trip, right? We have to recognize that no culture is superior or inferior. I think that's really core. An agreement with and understanding of what that statement means is foundational to having cultural humility. We have to really be humble and say, just because I grew up in this culture doesn't mean that it's necessarily the completely right way to do something or to be or to act. We have to be curious. I want to know more. I want to know more about where you're from and what you think and what you believe and how you feel. And we want to continue our learn. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Sorry about that. I didn't hear it pop up, but that was my little calendar reminder. Thanks for letting me know it was blocking the view. We want to have continued learning about other cultures. Okay, we want to be honest and open about what we haven't learned yet. Okay, all right. We want to reflect and consider these power dynamics and imbalances that can occur. So we have to look at what are our biases or assumptions? What do we instinctually consider wrong or rude? So that was that instinct, this is rude, this is not. Think about those things when you encounter something. Take a step back, right? And when you find yourself reacting to something, take a moment and think, why do I instinctually feel like it's really rude for a student to enter class late? And why does that upset me? Okay, take a pause. Why is interrupting rude? Why is punctuality good? Why is it polite to say thank you? Okay. What dimensions of your individual culture might play a role in the perspective that you have that you've developed, right? And then also that when we have power imbalances, oppression, racism, how does history play a role in all of this? And talk about it if you feel equipped to, but you want to do your research, beforehand. Do more reading to understand some of these issues. And then have these open and honest dialogues. We want to share experiences and mistakes that you've made in different cultural settings and the self-reflection that led you to your perspective. So I've tried to do a little bit of that and model that for you today of saying, I had this experience or had that experience or, I've run into this. Talking with other teachers is a really great way to do this too. If you can have an open and honest dialogue with your colleagues about things that have happened and be honest about them. Ask questions like, what's your experience been with that? And listen without judgment or taking a stance on what's right and wrong and good and bad or polite and rude. And we want to be open and honest about what we haven't learned yet. I noticed that all of you were very open and honest about wanting to learn more when we did that opening activity on the Padlet. So thank you for that honesty and openness that I want to learn more. Okay, and finally, we want to model it. So let's look at what that looks like when we have a classroom. So here we go, modeling and practicing. We don't have a ton of time to go through all of these, so I'll leave some of them for you to examine and think about when you have time to reflect on the presentation more. But I'd like you to start with this one. You're presenting a cultural tip to your students in a class or in a one-on-one setting about saying thank you when people open a door for someone in public. So let's talk about this one for a moment as a group. It might seem kind of benign to us when you're thinking about opening a door for someone in public and saying thank you. How could you model an attitude of cultural humility if you're teaching this in a classroom setting? How would you introduce this to students? Take a poll. Okay, good. Ask what they would do if someone opened the door for them. Show someone cutting in line and then the opposite. I like this. Yeah. What about this? What if I come into the classroom and say, it's very important in the United States to say thank you when you open a door for someone in public. It's true everywhere. We all do this. What do you think about that? How I introduced it? It's pompous. Yeah, it kind of is, isn't it? So that's sort of the point here. We want to sort of lower what we think is right and wrong, and we approach it and say, in in many circumstances, not always, but in many circumstances, people will say thank you when they opened a door for someone in public. Has anyone ever had someone get angry at you for opening a door? Okay, Anna, I see you're nodding your head. Yeah, you want to tell us a little bit about the situation where someone got angry at you for opening a door?
Well, I mean, I can't remember a specific example, but
Mhm.
like I can imagine situations where either like a woman or an older man, like if I open a door for an older man, he might be offended, like I can handle it, that I'm feeling that I'm implying that they're not capable.
Yeah,
Or sometimes so I think some women might be feel resentful of sort of a patriarchal,
uh-huh.
view of it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So we've got those two kind of things, right? Because the person that maybe the older gentleman who feels a sense of uh, discomfort with maybe having a woman open the door for him because he comes from a belief system and a generation where opening doors was, what men did. And then, also too with maybe feminism, it's like I can open my own door. Thank you very much. It's so it's not always true that a student who's being presented with this, people are going to say thank you if you open a door for them. And then they don't experience that. Yeah. But I like what Vicky says in the chat. Try something like this. In this community, people think it's polite to say thank you when someone opens the door for you. Yeah. Or you could even modify it a little for many people because it might not be 100% of the people, right? So this is where we can it looks like it's something real benign to talk about a culture. Well, in the United States, we do this, you know, but think about it. Is it really true? And how do we want to frame it so that if there are these kind of squishy areas that it might not be true for every student, for every person experiencing it all the time, how do we use that sort of openness and understanding that cultural humility can give us to talk about these things? Okay, yeah, exactly. And the US is also made up of many cultures. Yeah. What's rude in Wisconsin may not be rude in New York City, right? That's being a little bit of a, stereotyping there. Um, but it's true. Community, city to city, um, person to person in the United States. So we won't talk about these other ones just for sake of time, but there are some juicy ones that are there. You might actually try to talk with them if you have a group of colleagues that you would be interested to work on this cultural humility together. So another tool is that we create stories and narratives about behaviors that we see. And sometimes they're wrong. So what we need to do is we need to see facts and observe behaviors with patience and take a step back because we're often quick to interpret based on what we think we see. And so if we step down, look at the facts, we observe that lead us to those judgments, we can begin to approach things a little differently. So here are some facts versus explanations. And I'm going to go through them, and I would just like you to tell me which one is the observation and which one is the interpretation. So let's focus on the observation. You tell me if it's A or B. So number one, they are disorganized and disrespectful of other people. They always show up 10 minutes after meetings start. Yeah. B is the observation. They're angry. They're speaking in a loud voice and using lots of arm gestures. B. Good. And C, or 3, they don't speak up in meetings. They don't have strong opinions. A. Good. So this is what I'm talking about, that we have to kind of back down our assumptions that we're making and just look at the behavior. And then from there we can go. So there's something called the ladder of inference. And this is where I've seen myself do this so many times. And it happened a lot, with this happens a lot between spouses, happens a lot between parents and children. So again, this is sort of a useful thing that you can put into your daily life, no matter who you're working with. So we start off with this sort of observable data and experiences, which is simply like a recording of what we see and experience. And what our brains start to do is we start to select the data, because the data is just too much. If we had a running movie in our heads of absolutely every single little thing that happened to us, we wouldn't have the brain capacity, right? So we automatically, our brains filter the data. And on top of that, we start to add meaning, because our brains are also designed to sort of put things into groups and make connections. So we add meaning. And then from that meaning, we start to make assumptions. Oh, they must be angry with me because they're using a louder voice and lots of arm gestures. Okay, we draw conclusions from that and start to tell a story. And then from there, we even learn to adopt beliefs. And from beliefs, we take actions. And this is where we see that prejudice starts to turn into discrimination, which can even then spill over into violence, right? Because we're making those assumptions and adding meaning through the selection of data. Okay, so this is another way to look at it. Here's a couple of examples. A woman is not participating in the meeting. She's looking down, has her arms crossed, and keeps checking her phone. So this is the observable data that we see. What meanings could we potentially attach to this? Does she not want to be at the meeting? Okay, Vicky's shaking her head no. She's worried about something happening at home. Yeah, that could be a possibility. She's stressed. She's worried about a sick family member. Mhm. Yeah, there's all kinds of possibilities, aren't there? Um, but what we have to do is just sort of look and then maybe ask, right? If this is a student of ours and we see something's going on, instead of adding these personal and cultural meanings to it, we can just simply ask, are you okay? Is there anything I can do to help? And work out the situation. But it's also like, don't personalize it either, that it's not necessarily behavior that's directed at you, that yeah, she's dealing with a problem. Or maybe she's crossing her arms because she's chilly. I like this. Okay. A man gets free food from a food bank and was driving a new SUV. What about this one? Maybe it's a borrowed vehicle. Maybe he's picking up food for someone, right? Yeah. So we don't necessarily want to make, yeah, maybe he just lost his job. So he still has the new SUV, but is in a financial crisis. So we just don't know. And these are two good examples of how we can look at the observable, data that we have, and not draw just one conclusion, but think about multiple possibilities. Okay, so we don't have time to practice with the ladder. In fact, I'm kind of really behind, so I'm going to skip a little bit ahead. Um, I want to just leave you with that we enhance belonging and confidence when we open doors for students to share their experiences, knowledge, and perspectives. And so when we have the teachers becoming learners and students becoming teachers, this is when we start to have this exchange. And it's also really critical to language acquisition. So these are the 8 steps. And I think I kind of go through and explain them a little more one by one. Um, but again, I think we had a little more interaction than I was expecting today. And so I've run a little bit out of time. I want to just talk about that when you open these doors for multi-directional learning and you create these zones where people feel comfortable because they're not going to be judged, um, that we start to see our classrooms flourish and blossom when it comes to having cross-cultural conversation. So let me pop ahead here real quick. And again, you can look through the slides about how to implement each of these 8 steps. But before we go today, I want to mention that we actually have a new product at Intercambio, which is a 6-module course on cultural humility. This is something that your school or institution or um, group that you are involved with can purchase, and it's designed to be facilitated by your organization. So we give a facilitator guide and then go through modules. The modules themselves can take up to 2 hours. So it's around 12 hours of work that you can do. And this information, you can scan the little QR code and it will be available to you if your organization is interested in doing more of this work in much more depth. So here we are coming to the end. I've got a QR code. If you want that presentation, go ahead and scan this. And then maybe too, I don't know, probably Robin or Marcia can get you the link over here. If you want to fill out this form after the fact, we can make it available to you. But that brings me to the end. So thank you so much for coming. And I hope that you feel that you've gained some of the things that you came for. Just real quick too, there is a bibliography at the end. So when you receive that presentation, you can have that. So thank you, everybody.